The mortuary temple of Hatshepsut is a mortuary temple. This is a form that we're going to see developing because of the use of the Valley of the Kings. You don't want people going into the valley that has the sacred or secret tombs other than the craftsmen who are working on it. And so you're going to have these public mortuary temples that are going to turn up in the general vicinity. If we go behind that ridge of mountains that's right behind the mortuary temple, you would be in the Valley of the Kings, to give you some idea of where we are. Now, Hatshepsut is one of at least 3 queen regents that ruled Egypt. So these are queens who actually had power, as opposed to queen consort, which is a queen married to the king or pharaoh, but has no actual power. When the pharaoh or king dies, they simply become irrelevant. And she was regent to Thutmose III. Thutmose III was very, very young, about 3 years old when he took power. She becomes regent, and she slowly really becomes pharaoh. And by the way, she's not trying to hide the fact that she's a woman. There is this sort of idea that she's hiding it, that all the masculine dress is about her trying to play herself off as a man. But of course, all of the advisors, etc., all the people in the court would be well aware of the fact that she's a woman. They would have known that she was the regent. This would have been fairly common knowledge, at least among the people who are going to be important. Now, she does later proclaim herself rightful pharaoh, and she pulls this off by very slowly over the years taking little bits of extra power and then taking her time to basically say that Thutmose just isn't ready yet. And if she were more severe, let me remind you, she could have easily just killed him. But she didn't. He survives. He will become pharaoh. So her mortuary temple is erected for several gods, including herself. And we see these multiple levels built up to create the mortuary temple for Hatshepsut. So we have 3 terraced columns, or 3 colonnaded terraces, where we have the entry, which would have been planted and spectacular. Remember, they're in the middle of the desert. Planting anything is going to take irrigation, fertilization, time. That is resource intensive. And then we move up through the courtyards, more than likely getting to the point where only the priests would be allowed into it. Let me go back here. Sometimes when I use my mouse, it flips slides. We have a chapel of Hathor. We will see a temple of Thutmose III as we move to the left, and Menhotep II. So we have several temples being built in the same area, which makes sense. You have to clear all that stone from the mountain behind it. Let's put these together. Let's try and use our resources well. So it is a central axis structure. In other words, those ramps and everything are symmetrical, or the structure is generally symmetrical. And we get a rhythmic pattern from the use of the columns in the front of the structure. Now, it originally would have looked like we see on the left, and what we're seeing is a reconstruction. So anytime we have a reconstruction, you kind of have to look at it with a little bit of weariness, wondering how accurate they really were. But these things are being rebuilt typically in the 19th and 20th centuries, so the last 150 years or so. The terraces would have been covered with this imported foliage, as I talked about, from areas of the Red Sea or down into Africa, making it much more vibrant. A space that would have been spectacular and inviting, sort of like going to a botanical garden, the domes, the Albrecht Botanical Garden in Madison, in the middle of winter. It's comforting. It's spectacular. In terms of plan, the whole thing builds up into this third courtyard, which builds up into really a shrine at the very back, that sanctuary of Ammon, a shrine that would have been effectively for Hatshepsut. That would have been where you would have worshipped her, or at least her priests would have been worshipped. The interior, as we see here, is decorated in low relief and sunken relief. Sunken relief means that instead of carving away all of the material behind the figure, you're actually carving the material of the figure away so that you create this sort of opposition of what is typically seen as relief sculpture. It would have been a common tactic used when they're lacking resources, artisans, and it would become fashionable at one time in Egypt, such as we see here. And this all would have been brightly painted. We see some of that paint has survived. The interior was built up with stone columns, and this whole structure is really remarkable for its size, for its artwork, for its statuary. The problem that we're going to run into when we're dealing with Hatshepsut is that Thutmose will eventually take power after about 20 years. And when he does everything he can to wipe Hatshepsut out. And so what we're going to see is he's going to carve out her name, or have carved out her name, from anywhere on the temple. It makes understanding Hatshepsut very, very difficult, because he does this throughout Egypt, as if he's trying to remove her from history. And one of the places where that's most obvious is, of course, at the Mortuary temple.